Welcome to the Living Medicine Podcast, where we talk about ethical medical use of psychedelic psychotherapy, teaching skills, examining the issues, and interviewing interesting people. Now let's start today's show.
Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Sandy Newis of the Living Medicine Institute, which is a business that provides training and content and resources for clinical and medical professionals interested in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in the broad field of psychedelic medicine. And this is the Living Medicine Podcast, where I interview interesting and influential people in the field of psychedelic medicine and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And I'm really excited today to have Dr. Sienknecht with me, who is a licensed clinical psychologist, co-founder and lead trainer at Polaris Insight Center, a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy clinic and training center in San Francisco. Dr. Sienknecht has undergone training in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy with the Ketamine Training Center, MAPS, and Intertrek. He was involved in some of the MAPS studies, adherence rater, investigator, and study therapist, which is many of the roles, and the LICO-sponsored phase 2 and stage 3 clinical trials for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, and a supervisor and educator for various MDMA clinical sites. His area of expertise includes mood disorders, treatment of mood disorders, chronic pain, trauma, integration of psychedelic experiences, and his interests include relational psychoanalysis, consciousness research, transpersonal and mindfulness-oriented psychotherapeutic modalities, and the roles and uses of music in psychedelic experiences. And he's presented at a number of conferences. He's involved in writing projects, and I am delighted to have you here. So thank you so much, Eric. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah. Wonderful to be here, Sandy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, I always like to start this out because people have many interesting and various paths about how they got into the field. So let's just start with that. So how did you get into the field? What was your path? Because the people that I talk to tend to be fairly all into this and, just reading your bio, you're deep in this in many, many different ways. And so, what's your journey to be just kind of deep in the mix with all of this?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Let's see, I'll try to provide the short version of this. I found myself trying to essentially kind of get and heal from depression when I was in my late adolescence. I had a really difficult high school experience and was looking for support and kind of guidance around how to manage the depression and feel better. And there wasn't a lot of psychotherapy services available through my school. In fact, there was really none. And I found myself exploring the use of psychedelics almost out of necessity because nothing was working, and I was needing some clarity and sense of purpose. And so it was the early psychedelic experiences that really informed how I kind of shifted how I was relating to myself, how I was relating to the world and others. They catalyzed a kind of intellectual and spiritual curiosity around studying the mystical experience, understanding that phenomenon. Had a mystical experience when I was 18 with a psychedelic, and then that was the start of healing from depression and finding my purpose. And I'll just fast forward. I studied world religions and philosophy in college, but then I was trying to figure out a way to have a career that was made. I didn't see myself being a philosophy teacher, let's put it that way. And I found I was going back to med school to take pre-med classes, and during that time, I found myself in a class on the psychology of religion taught by Ralph Hood Jr. And Ralph Hood Jr. had spent his career studying non-ordinary states of consciousness and studying specifically the mystical experience, and developed the Hood's mysticism scale, which is a self-report measure of certain features of the mystical experience that you can kind of give to someone to confirm or whether they had a mystical experience, but also just for their own self-reflection. Anyway, I found it I really resonated with that, and I wanted to study the mystical experience and working with non-ordinary states of consciousness for therapeutic healing purposes.
That's so interesting. Is that the same scale that was used in the psychedelic studies?
It was another version of the Hood's mysticism scale, but that was the original.
Oh, interesting. Oh, wow. So you've been like in it from like the very beginning, like studying specifically that particular aspect and then how that relates to psychology and healing because you were doing it yourself and then you landed in grad school.
Exactly. Yeah, that brought me out to CIIS and did the PsyD program there, and then got involved in the MAP study after that, and then founded Polaris, and I've been. But I've been doing the work clinically maybe for about 9 years or something. So
when did you all found Polaris? When was that?
2018.
Okay. Yeah. So, and that is something that you founded with Veronica, correct?
Yeah, Veronica Gold and Harvey Schwartz.
Okay. And is Polaris Institute, is that the clinic or is that the training program? Or have they always been linked?
Yeah, well, it's the organization is Polaris Insight Center, and it has both a clinic and a training program.
Okay.
And we do retreats as well. So, all of the above.
Okay. So you just kind of dove into it. I mean, I did something similar. Like I started in 2019. I started doing it clinically. I started doing training, not as immediately, but in 2022, I came into this kind of with an eye to really integrating it. And interestingly, actually through some similar pathways, like the study of world religion and things like that, and just kind of like getting off into non-ordinary states and pondering the role that played in psychology, because that's what I was studying at the same time. So we have that in common. So I mean, you're like deep in it. I mean, all the way, like the research, the writing, all of the things. So what is it that keeps you so committed to this field at this point? Like what keeps you interested? Like what's fascinating? And then we'll kind of get into some of the therapy stuff.
Yeah, great. I really am kind of continually, perpetually curious about learning about consciousness and learning about the various states of consciousness, and what is consciousness is a great mystery. But there seems to be certain states of consciousness that can be can lead to incredibly therapeutic and can resolve trauma. Not in and of itself. If you access that state, your trauma is resolved, of course. But it seems to be an important part of the process for some people, and it certainly was for me. I was very much in this, what I might call like the calculative mindset, which is, I think most of us are in that state of consciousness most of the time. Waking consciousness, we're oriented towards getting what we want and avoiding what we don't want, and planning, and this is how we function in modern day society. It's nothing wrong with it, but a lot of people are, including myself, with imbalanced, way too much calculative mode and not enough kind of meditative states of consciousness that can balance the scales. And so I was at a Kriya conference in 2017 organized by Raquel Bennett, which was a gathering of people working with therapeutic ketamine from all over the country, and Carl Jansen was one of the presenters, and he was the author of the book Ketamine Dreams and Realities, published back in 2000. But it's a great book, great resource. But he made
Published in 2000.
in
Interesting.
2000, yeah,
That was
like
ahead of
right
time.
after ketamine was scheduled as a in Schedule 3. Yeah, right after it was. Oh, sorry, it was made a controlled substance.
Okay, interesting.
But he made a point in his talk that trance and inducing trance is maybe the oldest form of medicine.
Hmm.
And I just, yeah, like I hadn't considered that really before. I mean, I was aware of all of the, thousands of years of indigenous medicine traditions and work, shamanic work, but yeah, like that, kind of really landed and hit home and resonated. And so back to your question, it's like, in a way, it's something new that we're doing, providing psychedelic therapy in the West, but it's also not new. It's been around for a long time, and we're just, kind of stewarding this access to the medicine and in a safe and supportive container, and attention to preparation, integration, and so I find it all very, very meaningful, and being able to kind of accompany someone through their own personal journey and is such a meaningful kind of role. Like, I feel honored to do that with people, and that they give that trust to me to hold them in that, and help help them navigate however I can. And it's important. Like, well, that kind of speaks to the maybe another question that you might ask in this talk, which is the inner-directed and the
Right.
inner-directed approach and the
Yeah,
client's
well,
own.
let's talk about that. I mean, and I'm just kind of tracking because you and I talked about it before we got on here, but this piece, I've mentioned it before, there's like the therapeutic pieces that where people can be, can do medicine alone or various trance states, or just, I loved in your bio, you just said non-ordinary states, just overall, because that's a lens I share as well. Like, it's not all psychedelics. There's lots of ways to access non-ordinary states, and they can be powerfully therapeutic.
Yes.
We can have like profound life-altering experiences on our own or with a group without a therapist. And yet we're both involved in like training and working in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So let's get back to that non-directive, inner-directed. But like, what are your thoughts? You've trained bazillions of people. Like, your program is well established. People from all over the world come to it. Like, what does it take to become a great psychedelic therapist? Like, what does that even mean? How is that any different than anything else? And, what does it take? Like, how do we become great at this work?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a great question, and I mean, when you say great psychedelic therapist, I'm not sure I know what that looks like, because I don't feel like I'm a great. I think I'm a good therapist and a good psychedelic therapist,
Mhm.
but I'm also learning and continuing to learn about how to do this in a good way, and so but I'm kind of have more and more experience in the therapist role, and this very deep, personal, intimate process that people go through. And there's some things that I would I think my own personal work with psychedelics and also in psychedelic therapy. I've had limited number of those experiences of like guided sessions, but and as well as non-medicine work and my own psychotherapy, that has been a really important, has been just so helpful and useful in being able to be open to my client's process, to be attuned to the client's process, and present, and being able to step into what I might call like beginner's mind, which is from Michael and Annie Mithofer and the MDMA treatment manual. This idea that, it's important to have so in the therapist role, you want to have a treatment plan and you're a structure to the sessions, preparation, the experiential session, the integration session. And you want to be trained in how to, kind of facilitate those. But in the actual medicine sessions, you don't know what the client needs to look at, understand, process, metabolize, integrate, and that the guiding force of that process is the client's inner self-directed, we call it inner healing intelligence, but there's other words for it, authentic self, true self in the psychodynamic tradition, or like self energy and internal family systems. But yeah, that capacity for the individual to heal themselves through tuning into their body, their emotions, their inner world, their imagination, and the therapist's role is to support that process and try to optimize the conditions for that inner healing intelligence to arise, and try to remove obstacles that could interfere, distract, disrupt that process. And so
I love that sentence. How do we optimize the experience to make that happen? That's a good one. But it's true, right? We're like creating the optimal conditions through all of the different things that we're doing, to be able to make that happen. And, that just kind of leads me, although, inner-directed, non-directive, like it really seems to me like there's a lot of vagueness around that particular term. And yet it's everywhere. So, what I heard you say, and tell me if this is what would be your actually definition of this, like really, like you said, optimizing the conditions for a client to really connect to their own, to their own self energy. I'm going to repeat it now, but, and would that be their own self energy, their own relational self, their most authentic self? Right. Kind of like you did the word switching thing that I love, where we went across all the different traditions and kind of show where that shows up. And so, okay, so we're creating the optimal conditions for that. And then what do we as therapists do? Like, what makes us good? Is there a time to join with that? Is there a time to push a little bit more? Like, and yeah. Let's just leave it at that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great. So that's a huge question, and it's kind of like the goal of any kind of training program is to like really
teach people to do that.
teach people how to do that.
Right. So, obviously, I don't anticipate that you're going to be able to encapsulate like your entire training program in like, a couple paragraphs, but it's just what comes to mind. I get it. I understand it's complicated.
Yeah. Well, I think that I think we're the client is learning through the process about what they need for safety and support, and what works for them and what doesn't work for them,
Mm.
both in regular, not ordinary state of consciousness and non-ordinary states. And sometimes that is something that is learned through doing it, and so but the therapist should be aware that this is a process, and it's a learning, and to be available to provide specific support, or you know, different things that the client is learning that they need. But we really want to like honor their and support their autonomy in the process,
Mm.
and their own, yeah, they're healing themselves. um, the therapist doesn't have some special, you know, magic or something that the client needs, right, to heal.
Yeah.
So it's all intrinsic, and um,
Yeah.
uh, yeah.
So what about, you mentioned attunement, right? We were talking about that kind of in our preliminary talk. And Marcella, as we all know, kind of an elder in the field and somebody that we've all learned from. She also spoke at length about that in the last podcast that was published. So, what are your thoughts on like what does attunement look like? How
Hmm.
can we teach that?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? And what's the role of that in this kind of work?
Yeah, so important. And Marcella and Bruce are teachers of mine, and they were teachers in the MDMA clinical trial, the trainings for that, and Michael and Annie Mithofer as well. And I really look up to the four of them as really embodying, at least in the training, very much like kind of the qualities that we want to kind of develop in ourselves as psychedelic therapists, and their humanness too. I could say
Mm.
that for all four of them. They're very kind of human and humble, and um, imagine they kind of meet each client where they are, and hold the process that is unfolding, that is organic and unique to each individual. But so yeah, like some of those qualities are like, you know, being present, good, listening, which these are not unique to psychedelic therapy.
Yeah.
Also important as as a psychotherapist to have these skills, but you know. I guess more specific to psychedelic therapy, being able, and attunement, to bring your word in, being able to listen at multiple levels to what the client is sharing, and also kind of attunement to the multiple levels of the client's experience as they're going through the psychedelic experience. And so, yeah, there's obviously the verbal, which we rely on a lot as therapists.
Mhm.
But there's the somatic, there's the emotional,
Mm.
the imaginal.
Mm.
Oftentimes people are in a visionary space where things are happening, and we don't always know what's going on, and we're holding space for that, and maybe tuning into what's coming up in our own imaginations as we're with the client. That can be a source of information. There's the relational level. There's listening on a more sensory level,
Mm.
listening on a vibrational, energetic level,
Sure.
um, and there's the transpersonal levels too. So these are all kind of ways that we can be with the client, and attune in these different levels. Yeah.
You just did something just awesome. Thank you. You might not even know you did it because you do this all the time. But you just named, what I heard you just name was that, tell me if I've got it because I might have missed them all, but it was, we're listening at the verbal level,
Yeah.
we're paying attention to the imaginal level, which
Mhm.
may or may not be expressed in the verbal. We're
Right.
tracking somatic, right? And you
Yes.
link somatic with emotional. So you just
Mhm.
said those, like somatic is emotional, which I
Mhm.
found interesting. There's the relational, like what
Mhm.
is happening, between us. Then there's the energetic, like the energetic of what is happening between us and the energetic that is happening in ourselves.
Mhm.
Then you looped back to what other imaginal content might be coming up for you as the clinician and being curious about that. Did I
Mhm.
get them
Oh,
all?
yeah. Yeah, totally.
That
Yeah.
was that was brilliant. I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And it really, because it really illustrates the complexity of all of the different things that we're tracking. Because what I see, and you probably see this too with, with trainees, is that, well, really, actually, I see this as much in clients. Like we put so much emphasis on the aha moment, like as if there's going to be some insight, some realization. And I don't really think that's where the change process really lies. I mean, sometimes. But, it's not the norm for my clients to come out of sessions going like, "Oh my God, I had this profound realization. Now my life is forever changed." Like that just doesn't really happen that way. Like it can happen a little bit, but there's so much else that's happening in terms of what change is and how we're working with it.
At all these different dimensions. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of those different dimensions. And I think it's interesting too to think about how we can also sensitize our clients to be tracking these different things as they relate to change too. Like how do people kind of begin to track that in their own attunement to themselves? And then how does that show up for them after?
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yeah,
So,
I think that's part of our role too, is to support change, however that looks, and it can be on multiple levels. It could be behavioral change, it could be change in thinking,
mhm.
change your relationship with self. But when the client is noticing these changes, just to kind of really um, pay attention and to reflect and to be curious about and
Yeah.
yeah.
I've been experimenting with like sensitizing clients to what change can look like in a little bit more almost like checkbox way to try to just like help them begin to get past this like the realization or the aha moment or I've processed some kind of content differently and just all the different ways that change could show up.
Great, great.
Yeah. Well, and then this kind of is something that's coming up for me too is, if we're kind of talking about the non-directive approach and helping clients track that. And are there times, do you think, when there's a time and a place to push a client a little more? Like I do a mentoring group and this question comes up often, like when do we know, like if a client comes in and they're doing a session and they have a specific intention or a specific goal, like do we push for that? Is there a time and a place to kind of for me, like working with the non-directive approach is a lot about co-creation. And so if something doesn't naturally emerge in the session, I'm specifically talking about ketamine, which is somebody's under the influence in my world for about an hour, and it's about a 2+ hour session. Do I push or not? Like, when do we kind of when do we lead? Is there maybe that's a better way to put it. Is there a time and a place for us to lead? I'm just curious what you
Yeah, that's a great question and inquiry, and very important. So I think it's not that we're following the client the entire throughout the entire treatment. Like, yeah, we do want to um, bring them back to their intention and at least be curious. Is there something that arose in this session
Mhm.
that is anchored, that we can anchor back to the intention? Sometimes it's very clear, sometimes it's not, but like we're, prompting them to come back, to that. But I usually do that kind of work more in the integration
Mhm.
sessions, and that during the actual medicine session, when they're in the non-ordinary states of consciousness, really, I'm mainly following,
Mhm.
and rarely do I suggest that they look at some particular content, or
Mhm.
and I'm certainly not making meaning with them about what they're experiencing in the session. Maybe there's some of that organically happens as they're coming back down and the end of the medicine experience. But yeah, and that makes me think of like, where our clients are exploring non-ordinary states of consciousness, and it's such a it's not a very it's we don't have like very quantum physics, like science, quantum physics, empirical science can't even like kind of land on what consciousness is. So it's like, I guess my point there is like, like in the medicine session, I'm interested in more in descriptions. If they are in a place where they can put words to their experience. Sometimes they're in nonverbal, they're not able to talk, and that's perfectly fine. And but like as they do start to like share, like I'm more interested in like descriptions of like, what are you noticing? What do you is there anything important that you need me to know? Or some these kinds of like open-ended questions. It's not about it's more descriptive than explanatory. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's going to lead me to talking a little bit more about the clinical process. But I just want to ask you just something, just point blank, which is just something that I've struggled with myself, is that I tend to do series somewhere between 4 and 6, kind of weekly or sometimes biweekly. And somebody might have come in, a client might have come in to talk about a particular issue. Maybe it's a traumatic experience or a series of experiences or a time frame or a particular relational issue that we're working with, and it doesn't come up, it hasn't come up at all in session. So what I've taken to doing is maybe if I'm doing 6, maybe by the 4th time in preparation for that one, I might, which would be integration because they're in between, wondering like, I'm noticing that this is not really coming up. It feels like we're working on it, and which is great. But what are your thoughts on that? And we kind of process through that. And would it be helpful if I actually brought it up, like
Yeah.
in session? So I'll get permission in advance, and then I just kind of nudge it. Like I might kind of am tracking the clock a little bit, and about halfway through, kind of tracking what else is going on. I might be like, so I'm just inviting now, just wondering if it lands, that you said that you wanted to kind of process through some of the things that happened in your earlier childhood with your, kids in your neighborhood. Let's just see if that takes hold. Like I just kind of like do it like that. And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And to me, that's a big step because I tend to do what you do, kind of more, I call it more like co-joining, we're kind of joining and deepening. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that. Because in some cycles, some circles that would be taboo. Other people are going to be like, of course, you're going to go right into that because that's what they said they wanted to do. But I'm
Yeah.
just curious what
Right.
your thoughts are.
I like that idea. I think with in the condition that you kind of talk about it in a prep session or in the in advance of or like at the beginning of like that 4th session that you're like you're saying, Sandy. Talking about it and really getting the clients kind of consent to do that, but as opposed to just like ambushing the client with the
So,
so you're
you want to talk about that thing?
yeah. But I like it too because and I sometimes do something similar myself, that in the non-ordinary, like more expansive state of consciousness, let's just call it expansive, versus normal. Sometimes things can land differently, and that prompt can like can reveal through exploring and inquiring into that new information, new perspectives, even like visions of and so it could be potentially very valuable to do that, and the thing we have to be careful of, I think, is not engaging the client's intellectual
Mm-hmm.
thinking mind too much in the experience. Um, but sometimes that just happens, organically, and particularly at lower dose
Mm-hmm.
psycholytic sessions. Sometimes there can be a lot of processing and intellectual, cognitive, emotional, and it can look like a really deep therapy session,
Mm-hmm.
regular therapy session, and so, but yeah, I want to, I don't want to like engage the client to feel like they have to engage at a cognitive, intellectual level when they're in this experience that is maybe not ready to be put into words yet or made meaning from. But yeah, I think you have to use your clinical intuition, and it's also like therapists have different styles and
Mm-hmm.
approaches, but I think the general approach of inner-directed psychotherapy, which we use in the clinical trials for MDMA with PTSD, and as we also use in ketamine, that it's like um, it allows for people, different kind of therapeutic styles and but the main thing is like the client is healing themselves. We're creating, supporting the inner healing intelligence to guide the client's process, and um, we're we're there's value to not knowing where this is going, and there's like following is a different kind of leading, or
Mm-hmm.
it's like in this work it's like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and it's incredible like how these processes unfold and the curriculum, the inner curricula that unfolds, that is so brilliant. How there's this inner innate wisdom that knows what a client needs at any given time to learn something that the therapist wouldn't have been able to even,
Yeah.
imagine. So
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting because it gives them that experience then too to anchor back to. Like another thing I'm also tracking is a lot of, you can call it process work or parallel process, kind of just the way the client is engaging with the whole entire thing. Like
yes.
from minute one, like the way they enter in, the way they drop in or don't, and what that says about what happens for them in their life, the way they come out, what kinds of things that they were tracking when they went through, just all of those different things, I think are also really fascinating and kind of indicative of really somebody's organized sense of self and defensive structures, but very applicable. So let's kind of talk then about the clinical process. Like, you know, um, what do we say? It's always the big question, what do we actually say? So let's just talk about that, like deepening prompts. You mentioned just saying things that are open-ended. Like if you were to give your like top five like deepening prompts, like run a whole session and say just this, like kind of, what do you recommend with that? And how is that different from like, your private practice clients?
Yeah. Yeah. So to go back to this kind of like listening more for descriptions than
Mm,
for explanations.
mm,
Um, I like, what are you noticing?
mm-hmm,
Because it's like more phenomenological. It's like, okay, yeah, like just kind of maybe see if you can name what you're noticing, even if it's a feeling, or it could be an image, it could be a color, or a quality of perception, but yeah, and it might be an insight, but like usually it's more like yeah, like there's this, I'm being carried along a current and I'm going through different scenes. And there's
Mhm.
this like vast landscape that I am in the desert looking at the stars. And so these are like great points to come back to. I'm writing down what the
Mhm.
client's saying as verbatim as I can, and then we come back to it in integration. And sometimes just you said desert, night sky, stars, and that can like
Mm.
remind the client of that experience, and just having the words that they said takes them, oh yeah, and then this happened, and this, oh, and I was thinking this, and I had this image, and so there's all this information that can come from. So uh, I, I like, what are you noticing? And another one is like, curious what's coming up in your experience.
I was just
Yeah.
thinking that. I was like, I'm curious what's happening for you right now.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and these are kind of they're open-ended, simple questions, and maybe somewhat intuitive. Like you're not leading them anywhere. It's just,
Mhm.
you know, another one is like, I'm here. Let me know if there's anything important that you need me to know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I
Something
love
like that.
that. I do. I just want you to be aware that I'm here with you and just notice what that's like.
Mhm.
And I kind of use my own kind of like felt sense in my own body about when that's good. And I use that specifically for people that I know that have relational trauma, which is most of the people that I work with. But just kind of, but I think that can also be leading, right? Like you're kind of like inserting yourself into the mix, which is like, just kind of I'm always kind of playing with that edge. Like, how
Yeah,
much do we insert ourselves into their process? But I personally think that we already are.
we already
And so
are.
working with that relational component is important. And I think it might have been actually at a Polaris training, Harvey might have said that, been the first person that named that for me. And I was like, sweet. Because I think he was
Mhm.
talking about that. I know you all were talking about that, so I know that you share that view, but that like, for me, I'm like, I feel like I want to be like in their bubble and be tracking what that's like for them. Not in a horrible way, obviously. Like,
Right.
so
Yeah. But we are in a relational context in
right.
psychedelic therapy, and the
Uh-huh.
client knows that, and so it's like, yeah, and you already are are in the process, as you say, and
Mhm.
um, one agreement that I like to make with the client beforehand is like, in preparation, like I might say something like, I might check in with you during the experience. And I
Mhm.
might say I might even share what I might say. Like I might say something like, what are you noticing? You, and if there's things that are coming up that you're able to articulate, that is great. And, but also if you're not able to engage at that level, or engage at like a, verbal level or intellectual level, I would say verbal level, that's totally fine too. And if you don't respond to me, yeah, I'll know that you're deep in the process, and I won't
Mhm.
continue, to like check in or try to get
Mhm.
information about your experience, right?
Right. It's okay not to talk. One of the things I like to say always in preparation, and I bring it up in trainings often, is let's just suspend the need to know. Right? We
Yeah,
don't actually need to know. We just
yeah,
want to stay in the curiosity, stay with it. The knowing can come later. Because you'll
yes,
see it, right? Like, I mean, I feel that in myself sometimes. I'll be like, oh, what is this? What does this mean? What is this about? And we're so
yeah,
trained from that with traditional psychotherapy, as if we're supposed to be, your term is making meaning of it all the time, when really we just want to like let it, like, I've got it. I'm taking notes, like it's
mhm,
okay. We don't need to know the answer to that right now.
right.
Yeah.
And the notes are like more descriptive too, I
Mm.
imagine. It's, yeah, and
It's not a soap note. I'm
so it's
just
like,
like where you said like desert, sky, river, blue,
yeah, 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 right.
writing on bubbles. I do periodically, and it's usually not the first session when I'm working with somebody, but when you get that answer of like, I don't know what I'm noticing. And then I will, be like, well, it might show up like thoughts. It might show up like sensation. It might show up like image. It might show up like emotion. And I think that's okay. I don't think that's
Yeah.
particularly leading. I think that's more like menuing, just like
Right.
giving somebody
Yeah.
a way that they might kind of a direction they could go.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I like that too. You're kind of helping without engaging, asking them to engage too much in the
Yeah.
cognitive level.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can tell. I mean, people don't really, I mean, I don't know for myself. Like, I mean, obviously I can't tell all the time, but you can kind of tell like somebody's whole being will shift when they start going into story.
Mm.
They'll just kind of like suddenly they're like, oh, like, yeah, well, that's like, when my brother and I were doing that one thing and you know how I'm working on that. And you're like, no, 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 hold on. Sorry, I just like tipped you into storyland. Let's see if we can go back to the body.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. But those associations
mhm,
might be like where they need to go too. I mean,
right.
it's not so it's hard to tell, and that's the kind of the art of this,
Hmm.
is but the Jerome Braun is a local Jungian analyst. I think he's actually lives in Switzerland now, or he's
Nice.
training there, but he wrote a chapter in the book Psychedelics and Psychotherapy,
Hmm.
The Healing Potential of Altered States by edited by Tim Reed and Maria Pappas Brayu.
Hmm.
But he has a chapter where he talks about reverent attention as a valid um, therapeutic position when
Ooh, I love
working
that.
with non-memory states,
Uh-huh.
and in contrast to interpretation, the analytic interpretation, which is akin to penning a blue morpho butterfly onto the classification board. Uh,
Uh-huh.
the reverent attention on one end, and then the interpretation on the other. And he said for a lot of time during a psychedelic experience, he says you know he's in irreverent attention,
Uh-huh.
and he's not thinking about what things mean, and I think that's a giving ourselves permission to be in that space and feel awe and wonder and curiosity, is a skill set. We all know how to do that intuitively. We've all been
Mm.
children, and
Yeah.
we still have that capacity, and so this is part of good training, I think, is
Yeah.
knowing that that's a really helpful place to be.
Yeah. I have a colleague who does adventure therapy and outdoor-based therapeutic work, and she and I talk about kind of some of the emerging research around just awe, like, AWE, like, and the relationship with mental health. And I hope somebody picks that up as a research thread in psychedelics. Like, I mean, I think that somebody could build a whole career on just the working with the felt sense of awe and what that is.
Yeah, it's Jorge Ferrer,
Mhm.
who was a teacher at CIS.
Mhm.
Maybe he still is. He has a book, Rediscovery of Awe, I think,
Oh, nice. Yes. Hmm.
and the therapeutic uh, potential and value of awe, experiences of awe.
I love that. So, one of the things that I'd like to bring up is, and I kind of chatted about this a little bit, like, so we both do training and we both do clinical work. Um, what can go wrong? Like if we're teaching people or just doing the work, like how might we be doing harm? Like what does wrong look like for the client? What does wrong look like in terms of, could we be teaching somebody wrong? Like what, I believe very strongly that as these things roll out, that there's going to be more harm. I do not believe that does not mean that we should do it. We shouldn't do it. Like I very strongly also believe that. But I think it's really important that we name that and continue to have these dialogues and make them overt so that we can continue to refine our processes and do our best to safeguard against it, recognizing that a degree of that, we're doing super deep work and consciousness expansion where consciousness meets therapy, like stuff's going to happen,
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about that? What does go wrong look like?
Well, that's a great question, and like there's like the obvious, the more obvious ways that can go wrong in terms of like boundary violation,
Mhm.
not getting consent around, the use of touch, therapeutic touch, and I'm just naming some, kind of extending the frame of the therapy in different ways, having longer sessions, all of the different ethical pitfalls that are also applicable to, psychotherapy. Uh, you know, being being really mindful and careful about boundaries and frame. But I think more interesting is like in the relational process, how
Mm.
what can go wrong, and a lot of my own thinking. I've really been learned a lot from my colleagues, Veronica Gold and Harvey Schwartz, around this, but also from the relational psychoanalytic field. Um, there's and it's helpful to think about it as almost like dialectics. So there's like the intrusion abandonment dialectic.
Mm.
Uh, as therapists, relating to the client, how much do we don't want to intrude upon their process and be too um, yeah, that being overly intrusive can distract them from their own process, can be
Mhm.
disruptive. It can feel like even like, oh, I don't know, violating in some way,
Yeah.
and not, and then on the other end, we don't want to abandon our clients or them to feel abandoned, as much as we can help it. And
Mhm.
so, how we don't want to withdraw too much or withdraw into like intellectualization. Like, what does this mean? And let's analyze it, right? That's a
Mhm.
kind of withdrawing and potentially a kind of abandoning. So, how do we stay in that middle ground,
Mm.
and where there's a spaciousness where we're inviting the client to give themselves permission to go wherever they need to go, and we're going to be with them and following them. We're also containing the process. That's an aspect of it. So we're holding the space, making sure that they're safe, and
Mm. Mhm.
providing support in different ways as needed or if asked for. Um, Another dialectic is gratification and frustration.
Mm.
So we can a lot of therapists have this over nurturing countertransference, we call it,
Mhm.
where there's this tendency to want to make sure the client's comfortable and is and validating everything, and like just overly nurturing, so that they don't have any challenging experiences to grow and learn, right?
Mm.
So there's danger in that, and also and I think there's, on the other end, frustration. There's this over nurturing transference can kind of be um, overly protective and not allow space for the client to be frustrated or disappointed. And I think in any therapy relationship, there's going to be times when the client feels missed
Right.
or misunderstood or disappointed or doesn't
Mhm.
like something the therapist is doing or how they're doing it. And we really want them to speak to that and to be in a relationship with that and to validate that and explore and all of that, to say that this kind of mutuality, a mutuality in the therapist-client relationship is something to really try to embody in how you're approaching
I
things,
love
and
that.
yeah, as opposed to like a more asymmetrical power dynamic where the therapist is in, right? That does um, that leads to, issues and problems.
Yeah. So I noticed that pretty much almost all of what you said was relational. Right. So when I ask, like, so I don't, yeah, I just want to reflect that too, which I agree. Like, what can go wrong? What can go wrong is that we get out of attunement, we get out of alignment. Like, we're not engaged in the process with the clients, or we're at a mismatch. Or I heard you also say they were overly nurturing, which I kind of interpret as kind of trying to rescue them, or,
Risk.
just figuring
Yeah.
out how to kind of like sit with the hard stuff,
Yes.
and let them go through their own process, but also not abandon them and really be with them. So not like overly be there, but also not be too distant. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's an accurate summary.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I like permission to not know as a therapist, permission to not to be confused.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're confused. We don't know what's happening. As long as they're safe, though, and they feel supported, just allowing that process to happen. There's another, Andrew Feldmore writes a chapter in the same book that I mentioned before, Psychedelics and Psychotherapy, and he says that therapeutic zeal in this work of psychedelic therapy can do untold harm.
Mm-hmm.
If you have zeal and have ambition to like heal or get to a certain point of wholeness, it sounds absurd to like say it, but there's people, that's part of the field, and so yeah, part of training is about like really increasing our self-awareness of any kind of agenda that we might have for the
Mm-hmm.
patient to, um, work through this early trauma process. Like it's natural for us to have ideas and theories about what is needed, but to really be able to bracket those and be yeah, so and there's another all of these quotes are coming up but for me, but from Andrew Feldmar too, in altered states I find it best to be guileless, no tricks, no deception,
Mm.
for any falseness or manipulation will be perceived, and if denied could re-traumatize the patient.
Totally. I mean, I think even, like our energetic, like one of the things I take care of, I actually do use a lot of touch, obviously with consent, but mostly just here, really, like kind
Mhm.
of as a tether and an anchor. And I'm much more careful if I'm distracted because let's face it, some days are better than others. If like my energy's all over the place, then I take care like not to touch the client as much, like,
Mm.
or even not at all, because I don't want that energy to be kind of a mismatch for them. Like I think
Yeah,
those kinds of things are important because if I come up to somebody and it's like, "Wah,"
yeah,
and
right.
on some level I'm transmitting that to them. So, I think those kinds of things, like how do we ground ourselves, like so
Yes,
that we are really in attunement. That word keeps coming up, um,
right.
but yeah, so kind of, just in the last couple minutes, like, you know, what do you think what makes an awesome training program? I mean, you run one, and then just like tell us where people can find us. What are you up to? What you find you? What's Polaris up to? How can they plug into this?
Yeah,
You can just start with the one and then move into the other.
thanks. Yeah, so like we teach in our training about like the 8 pillars of becoming a ketamine assisted therapist,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds really formal, but it's really speaking to the different dimensions of training and that we think are important. And there's the personal work and with one's own psychotherapy or medicine work or non-ordinary states of consciousness that is really essential to being able to help facilitate others and traveling that terrain,
Yeah.
and increasing self-awareness, and a lot of other reasons. But and then there's like self-paced learning, articles that you read, research studies, and around psychedelic therapy, and there's a lot of growing amount of literature on that, and our training program is specific for ketamine assisted therapy, so there's a lot of readings that we have for people, and then there's the live, more didactic presentations in our modules. Our modules are a mixture of didactic and experiential, but they're all online. But they're this live presentation where the trainers are there in person. It allows for discussion, Q&A, and that's an important component. Then there's watching videos of psychedelic therapy happening, right? Which is part of the MAPS MDMA training. We don't have much of that in our training due to confidentiality reasons and complications with sharing client material. But in our retreats, clinicians can see how others are doing the therapeutic work, whether it's their dyad partner, whether it's one of the trainers, and the trainers.
I mean, what I, tell me if this is at all similar. Like what we do is we'll kind of go in and observe like a sitter pair when they're doing their medicine, and then
Yes.
kind of step in sometimes if needed. Kind of
Yes.
like, almost like taking over, which in and of itself is a skill set. Like you want to come in with like a soft energy and not have either one of the people feel like you're barging in, but just to model. Is that kind of
Model? Thank you.
a little bit what you're saying?
Yes, yes. The modeling, how it can be done, one possibility, and so there's a lot of learning there. And then non-medicine practice is another component where you're not on the medicine, but you're maybe there's a way to practice interdirected psychotherapy without the medicine. And we have a module of training and practice module where we provide that opportunity to practice. And then there's like the supervised practice. So whether that's our new therapists at Polaris work in co-therapy with one of the more experienced therapists for at least a few sessions before, so that's one component.
I love that. Nice.
And
well, that is really comprehensive and amazing. So well done. Good.
And then ongoingly, like consultation and as needed is another that is really important. So
excellent. I love that. So any upcoming offerings that people could join into? I know you all have a retreat coming up. I mean, I don't know if I don't know if you have a level 1 or how, where can people plug in? How do people join in Polaris training in the next upcoming chunk of time?
Yeah.
And you.
Yeah, we have a website. There's a trainings tab. There's a trainings tab, which is all of the online trainings that we offer. I think we have, 12 or more modules. We also have a cohort training, which is the same training you would get in the module format of training, but like broken up into like smaller 3-hour classes every other week, and you're meeting as a cohort, so you're meeting together and going through the program. You can see we have a retreat. Our next retreat, I think, is later in the year, maybe August or September. And we have retreats in Berkeley and then also in Portland.
Nice.
There's a new training that's happening now, but it'll likely be offered again on group ketamine assisted therapy.
Nice.
Training people to do that work with groups. And then and that's through Rainfall Medicine in Portland. It's a collaboration between Polaris and Rainfall. And then we're also involved in supporting the Chacruna Conference, Psychedelic Culture Conference in San Francisco in April 17th through 19th, I think.
I was just on the website for that. So
yeah.
I'm actually taking a personal trip to Honduras to take my kids diving, so I won't be able to come, but I wish I could come. Every year I'm like, oof.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that
So
sounds wonderful.
good. Well, thank you so much. If you were to kind of like say like, oh, this is the one big thing I still want to say, is there anything else that you kind of want to share with the field or the people?
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, well, I'll just name this. That most people who have had psychedelic therapeutic experiences have had them in non-clinical environments like groups and ceremonies and recreationally, and that will continue to be the case for maybe forever. But so this psychedelic therapy is like one context in which we're helping to make the medicine accessible in a legal and good way, a supported way. But it's not the only one. And so like, yeah, I like to, I personally am very much an advocate for psychedelic therapy, not for everyone, but for those who are seeking it and those might be helpful for, but also, providing support and harm reduction for people who are exploring psychedelics in other contexts. And so, I think it's a really interesting, fascinating kind of psychedelic culture that we're in, and how do we support people in their healing process? And it can look at different ways for different people.
Oh, I love that. Right. It can look different ways for different people. So, and well, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and your expertise and all of your knowledge. And this was really a pleasure. And I really appreciate your time. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sandy. It's really a pleasure too. And yeah, glad to be in conversation with you.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Living Medicine. We'll see you again next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.